Hello everyone. I want to thank the organizers, namely my friend Cristiano Galvao, for inviting me to present. It's great to be here for another season. And I want to start by introducing myself. I am Nabil Mourad, and I'm a Microsoft Excel MVP, and I'm in Toronto, Canada. I own and manage the OfficeInstructor Training Center, specialized in delivering corporate training at client site and remotely anywhere in the world. I'm also a professor of computer applications in 2 colleges in Toronto. I'm an author of multiple textbooks revolving around Excel and are available on Amazon. I manage multiple social media platforms, including my blog site, OfficeInstructor.com, and my popular YouTube channel, youtube.com/OfficeInstructor. Just a few months ago, I received the Silver Play Button Award for passing 100,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. Combining data is a very common task we do in Excel and in Power BI. Combining data is a process where data from multiple sources are blended into a single data set using different tools depending upon many factors. I want to talk about these 4 points: the multiple sources, the blending of data, the different tools, and the different factors. And I start with multiple sources. At the most basic level, we may combine data in different cells, and we can do that by using a concat function, a text join function, or even flash fill. We can also combine sets of pivoted data, having same column headers and same row headers. The source data can be also in a normalized list, with column headers only and records in rows. Or we could have the data in a well-structured table. In a more advanced scenario, we may want to combine multiple worksheets of data, or even multiple workbooks stored in a folder. Combining data is a broad term, and blending the data can mean so many things. Suppose we have 3 sources sharing the same column headers and the same row headers, but with different values. If the data is in the same relative position, we can aggregate the values across the different sources, and this is called consolidation. We may also combine the data by putting the different sources side by side, and this is called merging. Or we may want to stack the different sources on top of each other, and this is called appending. It's the most common type of combining data. We can use different tools for combining data according to the work situation. The VSTACK and HSTACK functions are easy to use, but in most cases, we'll be using Power Query. There are situations where we can also use VBA, OfficeScript, or even Python. There are many factors affecting the solution. If the source data is well structured and needs to be combined in the same Excel file, then using functions can be the best choice. However, if the data is not well structured, like having inconsistent column headers, or a different number of columns across the different sources, or having a variable number of junk rows that must be removed, or maybe other data issues that need cleansing, Power Query will be the preferred option. Now let's switch to Excel and explore some real work scenarios. At the most granular level, you can combine data in cells. In this worksheet, I have 3 columns: first name, middle name, and last name, and I want to combine them in column D to create the full name. I can use a concatenate function, I can use a concat function, I can use the joining operator of Excel Shift 7, I can use flash fill, but I'm going to use the text join function. So in cell D2, I type equal text join. My delimiter will be a space, double quote, space, double quote. I then type a comma. I want to ignore empty cells, so I select true. I type a comma. And what would you like to join? I want to join the first, middle, and last name for the first record. I close the bracket and then hit enter. The function doesn't spill, and I have to copy it down. If you want the function to spill down, then you have to wrap it in a by-row function, and this is what I'm going to do. I hit F2 to put my function in the edit mode, and I wrap it in a by-row function. So I type by-row, and I open bracket. I select the array. My array will be the 3 columns of names, and then I type a comma. And in order to run the text join function, on each row of this array, from A2 to C20, I have to include it in a lambda function. So I type lambda, I open bracket, I can reference the array by giving it a parameter, let it be x. X refers to each row in the array from A2 to C20, I type a comma, and then I run the text join function. I have to replace A2 to C2 by the variable x. I then close the bracket for my lambda function, I close the bracket for the by-row function, and when I hit enter, I will have my text join function spill to the entire range. In my next example, I have 3 lists, and each list has a column header and a row header showing sales data for 5 different products from a specific region. And because I have the same exact setup on the next worksheet, but with data coming from the South region, and in the next worksheet, West, I have the same exact setup, same column headers and same row headers, and the data is in the same relative position, the data is in a predictable position. I can combine the data from the 3 regions and aggregate the numbers, and this is called consolidation. I go to the Consolidate worksheet, and then I go to the Data tab of the ribbon. In the Data Tools group, I click on Consolidate. You can select a different function to consolidate the 3 ranges, but I'll keep the sum function selected. I put my blinking cursor in the reference box, I click on the East region, and then I select the range from the East region. I click on Add to move it to the lower box, and then I click on the South worksheet to select the data from the South region, but Excel assumes that whenever I use the Consolidate tool, I'm going to consolidate ranges in the same location in the worksheet. Then it's pre-highlighted for me. All what I need to do is to hit Add, and then I click on West. The same range is pre-highlighted for me. I click on Add. I just check the box for top row and left column where I have the headers, and when I hit OK, I would have consolidated the data from the 3 regions in the All Regions worksheet. In my next example, I have sales data corresponding to one of the sales manager Paul in the Paul worksheet. And my data is in a table. I have 7 different columns, and I have the same exact columns in the next worksheet named Sandra, but with different values corresponding to another manager. And in the next worksheet, I have the same exact setup, the same exact structure, but for sales data corresponding to the sales manager, William. I want to combine this data all together, and because I named the tables Paul, Sandra, and William like the worksheets, I'm going to click on the VSTACK worksheet, and I want to use a VSTACK function to do that. When I combine multiple tables, I don't want the column headers to be repeated. I just want the column headers from the first worksheet, but from the other worksheets, I just want the records. So I'm going to create a VSTACK function equal VSTACK. The VSTACK function stands for vertical stacking. It will append the 3 tables on top of each other. So I type the name of the first table, Paul, and then I hit Tab. I want the entire table, then I open a square bracket and I select All. I close the square bracket, I type a comma, and then I want the second table named Sandra, and then comma, I want the third table named William. For Sandra and William, I don't want the header. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I would have appended the records from the three tables. I can do the same exact thing by using Power Query. I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, I click on the down arrow for Get Data, and I want to create a blank query, so I hover over From Other Sources and I select a blank query. There is a Power Query function that can combine the tables from the existing worksheet, and the function is called excel.currentWorkbook. This function doesn't work on lists, it works only on tables. So I'll be typing equal excel.currentWorkbook. Note that Power Query functions are case sensitive, so capital E, capital C, capital W. I open and close bracket, and when I hit enter, it will extract the tables from the current workbook. These are the tables in the content column. So if I click in the blank space to the right side of table, then I can get a preview of that table. I can see it here. These are the records for the first table, Paul. These are the records from the second table, Sandra, and these are the records from the third table, William. I want to combine the three tables together, so I click on the double side pointing arrow. I take the check away from use original column name as prefix, and then I hit OK. Now I would have combined the data from the three worksheets. You can select all the columns, Control A. On the Transform tab of the ribbon, you can look at the data type by clicking on Detect Data Type. For the cost, I want to change it to a currency, so I change it by clicking on the little icon to the left side of the column header. I select currency. I replace current. I'll be doing the same for the total. I change it to currency and I replace current. Now I have my data combined all together. I'm going to rename the query. So under the name, I'll be naming it, let's say, combined. Now I want to send my data back to Excel in a new worksheet. I click on the Home tab. I click on Close and Load. And the data will be sent in a new worksheet. And the name of the sheet will be combined. In my next example, I have three workbooks available inside a folder. Let's have a look at the three workbooks to understand the work situation. I'm going to open the three of them. So the first workbook is Amanda. The name of the worksheet is East. And in the second workbook, Melissa, I have the same exact columns, the same number of columns, the same order of columns, the same column headers, but the worksheet name is West. And in the third workbook, I have Sandra, and the name of the worksheet is North. I have the same columns in the same order with the same consistent column headers. I want to combine the data from the three workbooks from the three worksheets. And the problem we'll have is that the worksheet name is different in each workbook. I'm going to close the three files and create a new blank Excel file where I'll be combining the data. I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, and because my data is in a folder, I click on the down arrow for Get Data, from File, from Folder. I navigate to the folder. The folder name is Different Sheet Names. You don't have to see the contents, just select the folder and then click Open. In this window, I see the different files, Amanda, Melissa, and Sandra, that we just explored. I want to combine them all, so I click on the down arrow for Combine, and I select Combine and Transform, because I have some issues that need to be fixed in Power Query. This is the Combine File dialog box. It displays the first file. You can have a look at this file. When I click on East, you will note the different columns, and I have another issue here that I have 4 junk rows on top of the header row, product, client, city, and state. I can navigate to the right to see the different columns. If you want to see another file, the first one is Amanda. So if I click on Melissa, the name of the worksheet is West, and I can see the same exact setup with the 4 junk rows on top of the header row. And if I click on the third one, which is Sandra, I will see the records. The sheet name is North. And now I want to combine all of them. Then I switch back to the first file, Amanda. I select the East worksheet and I hit OK to fire up the query editor. If you look at the query editor, you will see that the 3 files have been combined. If I expand the query pane, these are preparation queries that have been performed on the sample file. And this is the output query, different sheet names, it inherits the name of the folder. But when you see this dotted red line, that means I have an issue. And if I click on the down arrow for the source file, you will see that it looks only at one single file, which is Amanda. I'm going to hit cancel, and if I scroll down, you will see that I have an error because the other files have an issue and they were not combined. I just see the records from the Amanda workbook. And to fix this issue, if you click on the transform sample file, you will see a step named navigation, and in this navigation step, the worksheet name has been hard-coded. And that's the problem. So if I remove the worksheet name, which is hard-coded, that will fix the problem. I'm going to delete, and when I click on the check mark, now it should fix the problem in the different worksheets. Before going there, I want to fix some other problems as well, the junk rows. So on the home tab, I click on remove rows. I want to remove the top rows. I'll be removing the top 4 rows. I type 4 and then I hit OK. I want to promote the first row and use it as header. Then I click on use first row as header. So that's fine for now. Let's go to the output query. I click on different sheets and here the data is combined. Now if I click on the down arrow for the source file name, I can see the 3 sheets. Data is coming from the 3 workbooks. I can fix the data type. I select a column, Control A on the Transform tab. I click on Detect Data Type. I select the cost column. I want to change the data type to currency and replace current. I select the discount column and I want to change the data type to percentage and replace current as well. I'm going to rename my query combined. And now I can send it back to Excel by going to the Home tab, Close and Load. It will be loaded in a new worksheet. I have my data 193 rows loaded. In my next example, I want to combine multiple workbooks, each one having sales data for a different year, 2022, 23, and 24. Right now, the data is exactly of the same structure and the same sheet name and the same column headers and the same number of columns. So if I open one of the files, let it be 2022, I have 7 columns. The name of the column headers is exactly the same across the 3 workbooks. The number of columns is the same. And the name of the worksheet is Sheet 1. I'm going to show you a dynamic way of combining the data from the 3 workbooks in a way that if you have other files with a different number of sheets, with a different name of the sheets, with a different number of columns, with a different column headers, totally inconsistent column headers, this technique will still work. It's the most dynamic technique. This is a new blank Excel workbook. I want to combine the 3 workbooks in a folder, and then I'll be adding another workbook with a different number of sheets, with different sheet names and different column headers. To do that, I click on the Data tab of the ribbon. I click on Get Data from File and then from Folder. I will navigate to the folder, and the folder is Change Names. I select that folder and then I hit Open. In this window, I can see the binary files from each one of the workbooks. These are the files 2022, 23, and 24 available in that folder. I want to take my data to Power Query, then I click on Transform Data. The query editor opens. So if I click in the blank to the right side of binary, this is a preview of the workbook. So the highest level in the hierarchy is the workbook. Inside each workbook, I have the next level, which is a sheet. Right now, the sheets have the same name, Sheet 1. The next level is the data itself. I want to reach the data itself. And to do that, I can use a function called excel.workbook. I can add it as a separate column, or I can just add it as a step. So if I click on the FX icon, now the previous step is source, and I'm going to wrap it in a Power Query function called table.transformColumns. I open bracket, and I'm referring to the previous step. So I type a comma, and the second argument is asking me about the operation. Transform operations as list. And to provide a list, I'm going to open a curly bracket. So I type a curly bracket, and in the curly bracket, I want to type the name of the column having the binary file, which is the content column. I type it in double quotation. I click after the closing quotation, I type a comma, and what would you like to do with each binary file in the content column? So I type each, I type a space, and I would like to extract the different objects. Among the objects, I have the Excel worksheets. So I use an Excel.workbook function. I open bracket, and I type an underscore, which means each individual record in the content column. And because each one of the binary files will have a table having the same exact headers, then I don't want the headers to be repeated. So I type a comma, and in lowercase I type a true, which means promoting the column headers instead of adding it as a separate step. I close the bracket for the Excel.workbook. I click outside the closing curly bracket, and I close the bracket for the table.transform columns. Now you might have noticed that instead of having a binary file, I have a table. So just to remind you, if I click on the source tab, I had a binary file. But if I click on the custom ones tab and I click in the blank to the right side of table, now I can see the different objects and I can see the sheet name. It's the same name, sheet 1, sheet 1, sheet 1 in each and every table, but later on when that changes, I'll make it very dynamic. I want to expand the content column, so I click on the double side pointing arrow. I just want to keep the data column, then I take the check away from select all, and then I take the check away from use original column name as prefix, and then I check data and I hit OK. Now I have the data column, it shows a table, but this table is different. This is the real data. So if I click on the blank to the right side of table, here is the data coming from the first workbook, and here is the data coming from the second workbook, and here is the data coming from the third workbook. They correspond to different years. The first one is 2022, the second one is 2023, and the next one is 2024. I just want to keep the data column, but I want to combine the three tables. The function that I'll be using, called table.combine, requires having my tables in a list. I need a list of the different tables. And to do that, I'm going to right-click on data, and I select drill down. Now, all what I get is a list of the different tables. Clicking to the right side of table is the same exact table that we explored a moment ago. Now I have them in a list, and this allows me to combine them by using a table.combine function. I click in the formula bar and I type table.combine. I open bracket. Look at the screen tip, it says tables as list, and this is what we did. I close the bracket at the end, and when I click on the check mark, I would have combined the three tables. Let's extract the year from the date column. I select the date column. On the transform tab, I click on the down arrow for date. I hover over year and I select year. So if I click on the down arrow for date, now I have 22, 23, and 24. That means the three files have been combined smoothly. I'm going to clean my data a little bit, so I hit Ctrl A, and on the Transform tab, I click on Detect Data Type. I select the cost column, and I change the data type to currency and replace current. I click on the data type for the discount column, and I want to change this one to percentage and replace current. I also want to rename my query. I'm going to rename it Combined. And I want to send my data back to Excel in a new worksheet, and I click on the Home tab, I click on Close and Load, and now I have my data in a new worksheet. If I look at the queries pane, I have 193 rows loaded. Now let's test by adding another file in the source folder having 2020 and 2021 data with a different number of columns, with different sheet names, and with a different column header. Let's look at that file and then put it in the folder. This is the 2021 workbook. It has two worksheets. One of them is named Nabil, having data from 2021, and another worksheet named 2020, having data from 2020. Now look at the column headers. In the 2020 worksheet, instead of having clients, I have customer. And if I go to the Nabil worksheet, I have client instead. I have the name province, while the name in previous workbooks was state. I also have a payment column which didn't exist in the previous files. I'm going to close this file and put it in the same folder and then refresh my query and look at the result. Here is the source folder. I'm going to paste the 2021 workbook having two sheets with different names and inconsistent column headers. I go back to my previous query. Look at this column, city, state. We don't have a payment column. We have data for 2022, 23, and 24 only. All what I need to do right now is to go to the data tab and click on refresh all. I can use the shortcut Control Alt F5. And instead of the 193, now I have 299 records. Let's look at the different columns. I have province. This is coming from 2021. And at the same time, I have city-state, which is the result of combining the first two files. So if I scroll down, I will see some data for the city-state here. The customer column is the same exact column like the client column. And the payment column is a new column that didn't exist before. We combined the data, but we need to deal with the different column headers. Then I'm going to edit my query. I right-click on Combine, and then I click on Edit to open the query editor. There are different ways of fixing the problem of different column headers. The common method for doing that is by creating a mapping table, a table that is used for renaming the column, in which you see the before and after, the name before and the name after, to unify the names across the different files. But I'm going to show you a much easier method to do that. The customer column is storing the same exact information as the client column. So I select customer, I press Control and Client, and then on the Transform tab of the ribbon, I want to merge these two columns. Then I click on Merge Columns. I can give it a name, let's say Clients. And when I hit OK, the two columns are merged together in one single column. I'm going to do that one more time. The city-state is storing the same exact information like the province. I press Control and select both columns. I right-click, and the same option is available in the right-click menu, Merge Column. I can give it a name, States, and when I hit OK, I would have combined the two columns. Now I can load my data back into Excel. I go to the Home tab, Close and Load. All the data is combined together. Although we have different sheet names, different number of columns, different number of sheets, and totally inconsistent naming for the column headers. In my last example, I have a much more complex problem. I have a folder, and in this folder, I have 5 different Excel files. The data in these Excel files is exactly the same, but the problem is, on top of the data, we have a different number of junk rows that we want to remove. Let's have a look at these files. This is the 2016 workbook. I have a column for the product, and then I have sales amount for 12 months with a total column and a total row. We have 4 rows containing junk data that we need to remove, and we want to combine the data from the other files. So if I look at another file from the 5 files available in the folder, so now this is the 2017 data. Look at the structure of the data. It's the same. I have a product and sales for 12 months with a total column and a total row, but the number of junk rows is totally different. How could we combine the data from the different workbooks? I'm going to create a new blank Excel file. This is a new blank Excel file. I want to combine the data available in a folder. Then I go to the Data tab of the ribbon. I click on the down arrow for Get Data from File from Folder. I navigate to the folder having the different files. The folder name is Junk Rows. I hit open. I can see the different files, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And because we have a problem here, we definitely need to go to Power Query. Then I click on Transform Date. The query editor opens, and I'm going to rename my query Fixing. I want to look at one of the files. So if I click on Binary, this is the first file. I want to see the contents. Then I click on Table. And these are the contents of the first file with the 4 junk rows, then a column header, and then the data. I'm going to perform some steps for fixing one of the files. And then I'll be saving these steps as a Power Query function, and I'm going to invoke this function on each and every file. And to do that, I start by bookmarking my data at this step. So I click on the FX icon, and it refers to the previous step, which is the same exact data without doing any transformation. But under Applied Steps, I select Custom One, I hit F2, and I want to name it Bookmark. By doing this, I would have created a step, and I can refer to this step at any point of time. I start creating my transformation. The problem I have is that the number of junk rows is different in each file. So in this one, the column header starts at row number 5. In another file, it might start at row number 8, 13, 15, whatever. We need to find out in each one of the files where does the column header start, but we want to do that in a dynamic way. So I click on the Add Column tab, and I want to create an index column that starts counting from 1. I click on From 1, and then index column is created. So as you can see, the index number 5 corresponds to the column header. So I'm going to right click on Total, and then I want to filter, and I select Equals. Then I'm keeping only the column headers, which corresponds to index 5. I'll be adding a step that stores the number of the column header. And to do that, I select the 5 under Index, I right-click, and I select Drill Down. So this step is recording the index number of the column header. I want to recall the bookmark step. So I click on the FX icon, and by default it refers to the index step, but I don't want the index step, I want the bookmark that I created earlier. When I click on the check mark, I'm back to what I had at the beginning, so I can even rename this step back to source. Under Applied Steps, I hit F2 and I name it back to source. I start fixing the first file and I want to remove the junk rows. Then on the Home tab of the ribbon, I click on Remove Rows and I select Remove Top Rows. And because I have 4 rows, then I'm going to type 4. And then I hit OK. If you look at the formula bar, a table.skip function has been created and 4 is hard-coded. To make it dynamic, I'm going to select this 4 and I replace it with the index tab. So I type index, and because the index records the column header position, then I subtract 1, minus 1. When I click on the check mark, it looks like there is no change. But the thing is, instead of having it hard-coded, it became dynamic. Now I want to move the top row and consider it as header, so I click on Use First Row as Headers. I don't want a total row because when I combine the data together, I don't want multiple totals along the way. So I click on Remove Rows, Remove Bottom Rows, then I want to remove row number 1 from the bottom, then I type 1. And now that I performed all the transformation, I want to convert this query into a Power Query function. To do that, I click on Advanced Editor on the Home tab. The Advanced Editor opens, and these are the steps for my query. To make it dynamic and convert it to a function, I need to create a variable. A variable is just a container, and this variable will store each one of the files. So I click before the word let, and I want to push it down, then I hit enter twice. I hit the up arrow, and I create the name of the variable in brackets. I open bracket and I'll be naming my variable my data. And my data will be storing tables. So the data type will be a table. I type as table. I click outside the closing bracket and I type the rocket symbol, which is an equal sign and then greater than. I created my variable, then I don't want all these steps. I delete the first 4 steps. And instead of having the worksheet name hard-coded, I replace it with my variable, my data. When I hit OK, I would have created a custom function. I expand the queries pane, and now I want to bring all the files available in the original folder and invoke this function on each one of the files. I right-click under Queries, New Query, from File, from Folder. The folder name is John Crows. I select it, and then I hit Open. These are the 5 files, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. I click on Transform Data, and it takes me to the query editor. And in the query editor, I can see the 5 files. For the name column, it stores the year, and I want to use it, so I'm going to select the name column. I click on the Transform tab. I want to extract the year. I click on the down arrow for extract. I select first characters. The year consists of 4 characters. Then I type 4. I hit OK. I rename the column year. And now all what I want is the year and the content column. I press Ctrl and click on Content. I want to remove the other columns. Right-click, Remove Other Columns. From the Content column, I want to extract the sheets available in each one of these files. Then I'll be creating in a new column an Excel.workbook function. I go to the Add Column tab. I click on Custom Column. And for the custom column, you can name it whatever you want. You can name it Extract. And I'll be using an Excel.workbook function. I open bracket. I want to extract the different objects available in the content column from each one of the binary files. Then I double click on content and I close the bracket. The green check mark denotes that I don't have issues with my function. I hit OK, and now I have the extract column. When you click to the right side of binary, then you see a file. When you click to the right side of table in the extract column, then you can see a table and you can see the different objects. I just want the data column. Then I click on the double side pointing arrow. I take the check away from select all. I take the check away from use original column name as prefix, and I just want the data column. I hit OK. There is no need to keep the content column anymore. I right-click on the content column and remove. Now if I click to the right side of table in the data column, this is the real data having the problem. For 2016, the one that I used as a model for creating my custom function that I named Fixing, I have 4 rows of junk data. When I click on the next table for 2017, I have a lot more. And you can see the data with the same structure below the junk rows. If I click on the next file, 2018, a different number of junk rows in each file. We need to run all the steps in the custom function named Fixing on each one of these tables. So on the Add Column tab, I click on Invoke Custom Function. The Invoke Custom Function dialog box opens. I need to select the function that I created. I click on the down arrow for function query. I just have one and I named it Fixing. I want to run it on a column and the column is data. So I click on the down arrow under my data, which is the name of the variable, and I want to run it on a column name. I select column name, and then for the column name, we have 2 columns, year and data. I'm going to invoke the Fixing custom function on the data column. When I hit OK, I get a table. The table under data shows the problem. But if you select a table in the Fixing column, now look at that. We fixed the problem and we removed the junk rows. If I click on another table, then you can see that problem has been fixed. If I click on a third table, that's the same exact thing. Now I don't need the data column. I right click and remove it, and I want to expand the fixing column. I click on the double side pointing arrow, and here are the different columns that I'm going to combine. I don't need a total column. Then I take the check away from total, and then I hit OK, and I would have combined all the data. I have a year column, I have a product, and then I have the sales or the quantity for 12 months. I need a separate column for the month and a separate column for the quantity. Then I select year and product while pressing Control, and I want to unpivot other columns. I right click, and from the right click menu I select Unpivot Other Columns. I get a column for the month. I'm going to rename it month. I get a column named value. I'm going to change it to quantity. I hit Control A and look at the data type. On the Transform tab, I click on Detect Data Type. I can rename my query Combined. And now I want to send my data back to Excel after combining the 5 files and fixing the problem. And I want to visualize my data in a pivot chart. I click on the Home tab. I click on the down arrow for Close and Load. Close and Load to. I want to create a pivot chart, which will automatically create a pivot table. I hit OK. And I can see the pivot table field list. I can drag the month to the rows. I can drag the quantity to the values. And I created my pivot chart and my pivot table. I'm going to improve it. I resize my pivot chart. I don't want the filter fields, so I right click on one of them and I select Hide All Field Buttons on Chart. I don't want the legend, so I select it and delete it. I don't want the grid lines, so I delete them. I want to reduce the spacing between the different columns and change the color of each one of the columns. I hit Control 1. We have a gap width slider. I drag it to the left. I click on the fill icon and I want to change the fill color. I expand the fill and I check the box Vary Color by Point. I also want to give it like a beveled appearance. So I click on the Format tab, and for the shape effect, I hover over shadow and I change it to inner shadow. That looks much better. Now to make it fully dynamic, and I want to look at the quantity sold for each month in each year, I'm going to add a slicer. So on the Pivot Table Analyze tab, I click on Insert Slicer. I want a slicer for the year. I hit OK. Here is my slicer. I don't want the header year. Then I click on Slicer Settings. And in the Slicer Settings, I take the check away from Display Header. I hit OK. I want to move my slicer on top of my pivot chart. And I want to resize it. So I click and drag from the lower right sizing handle. And on the Slicer tab, I want to increase the number of columns to 5. So I increase it to 5. And now I finished creating my project and I want to test it. So if I select 2016, everything is working fine. If I select 2018, everything is dynamic. I can also press Control and select a different year, 2018 and 2020, and everything is working fine. I can clear the filter by dragging across the slicer, and I'm back to all the data. I showed you different examples for combining data. We combine data from cells. We combine data from a pivoted list. We combine data from normalized list. We combine data from normalized table. And then we move to the next level of combining data in a folder. And we created a dynamic solution for combining data that can accommodate different names of the worksheets and different number of sheets and inconsistent column headers. And finally, we created a custom function to fix the problem of different number of junk rows. I hope you found value in my presentation today. I encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter and to my YouTube channel to be notified when new tutorials are released. Thank you for watching, and until we meet in another learning adventure, I wish you all the best.